Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for Boxing Scene's top stories here on ProBox TV, your boxing channel. I'm George D. Metellus. Remember to download the ProBox TV app where apps are available. You get the great insights of our world champions and Hall of Famers with Chris Algieri, Paulie Malignaggi, and Hall of Fame trainer Teddy Atlas joining us here on Top Stories. Well, the recent Riyadh season event in Saudi Arabia was sparsely attended with little to no atmosphere inside the venue. Now, that card merely brought to light a long-standing issue with boxing that was brought up in a recent Boxing Scene article. It's been an issue all over the world with these sparse attendances in the venue at huge events for a long time. All right, Chris, what is it like as a boxer to fight in front of sparse crowds, and how does it affect the motivation and the performance of a fighter?
Well, I think it depends on the athlete themselves, but it's definitely going to have an effect. You know, the roar of the crowd, it's one of the reasons that many fighters, if not all fighters, actually compete. It's the crowd, it's the house, it's the feeling, it's the energy, it's the passion involved in the sport. It can definitely affect guys. I called a lot of fights during the pandemic, and we were in dark shows with no crowds, and it definitely affected guys. Some more than others, and some of them actually spoke about that after the fights. With the Teofimo Lopez Vasily Lomachenko fight, that was a fight that sticks out in my mind as being a fight that was fought with no crowd because of the pandemic. And you know, that fight could have been a different fight if they fought, you know, with the crowd, because it does have an effect on the athletes. Like I said, you can hear the crowd, man. You can feel the energy of a crowd. It does truly make a difference. But also, some guys are better because then the crowd can actually make them do things they get more excited than they need to be. So it can definitely have a big effect. But this isn't anything new. We've been doing long form cards for as long as the sport's been around. And early on in cards, you go and you watch the four and six rounders at the beginning of the show, there's nobody there because a boxing card can be 6, 7, 8 hours long. And there's not that many diehards who are going to show up and spend their entire afternoon and evening watching fights, going to concession stands and getting $15 beers all night. So it's nothing new. I think it's just kind of part of the sport. But now that we're seeing this in Riyadh, I mean, you take the good with the bad, right? We're getting the fights that we want. The fighters are getting paid what they deserve. So we don't have an atmosphere. It's something that we can work on. But listen, I'll take the good fights any day.
Yeah, Paulie, what's your take on how the playing in empty arenas and sparse crowds affects the fighter's performance and mindset?
I think, listen, it's a talking point. I think, it does have an effect psychologically. When you're getting hit or when you come up with a big salvo, the crowd gets loud, it gets your adrenaline pumping, there's reactions, there's oohs and ahs. Obviously, that has an effect on your emotional stability in a good way or a bad way when you're fighting. So obviously, the crowd does have an effect overall. And I think, obviously, anybody will tell you that they do this. One of the reasons they do this is the roar of the crowd. The crowd win the crowd and win your freedom, like the movie Gladiator, right? I mean, it's an amazing feeling. Well, it's part of what really epitomizes a fighter is the crowd. But of course, I also think there's the other side of the conversation. And this is something that I'm starting to wonder why we're having this conversation now, why it's becoming a talking point constantly. I don't remember, I was young, but I don't remember anybody complaining Mike Tyson was fighting Tony Tubbs in Japan, or Mike Tyson was fighting Buster Douglas in Japan. When he gets knocked out, you don't even hear a pin drop. You don't even hear nothing. You know what I mean? Like the crowd, although it was full over there, they're trained to not make noise. I don't know how it is now over there, but I remember back then. I mean, there was like they don't cheer, they don't make ooh and ah, they don't make noise. So it's not like this is something new now. Like the champ Chris said, also on undercards. But again, it could be said that on undercards you're not as important of a fighter. But yes, you're doing that in an empty arena as well. A lot of times when you're on a deep undercard. I do think there's a preference for big fights to have a big crowd. I do think there's a preference to give it that emotional boost and to give it the allure. It's more so the allure, the optics, and then even the sell in your ears, to make it feel like a big moment. There's something about Wembley Stadium when the fights are there and the crowd is jumping and it's loud. Yet you can feel the atmosphere, and it makes the fight feel special. So I get that, but also on the other side of it, this isn't something that just started. I mean, on and off, we've had this kind of thing before. We had it during the pandemic. Like I said, all the way back in the 80s, Tyson was fighting in Japan in front of very quiet crowds. And there was a ton of people there, and it was still quiet. So, the Middle East is this kind of culture, but I'm not really sure that it's anything but just a talking point and, and nothing more than that.
Yeah, Teddy, how does that affect you as a trainer of a fighter, knowing that there's sparse crowds, there might not be that energy in the crowd?
Yeah, look, as a trainer, you might not want everyone hearing what you're saying, and everyone can hear it. So it can have some kind of impact, personally, depending on the person, how they're impacted by such things. Like if I'm screaming at a fighter during a fight, you're hoping the fighter can hear, but barely anyone else is going to hear with all the din, with all the noise going on. But in a sterile arena, in a vacuum like that both champions described, which we've been there before, there's no doubt about it. Everyone's going to hear what you're saying, and there will be some trainers that would be adverse to maybe being themselves. Hey, you idiot! Stop moving your. What are you doing? No, I'm not saying you should call him an idiot, but all of a sudden they might be a little bit, hesitant about being themselves, where everyone can hear it. Where usually it's a funny thing, people probably don't think about it until we just brought it up, but yelling at a fighter, doing your job or whatever you obviously think your job is in that way, everyone takes it a different way. It's just natural because you're just doing it. You're doing it in a noisy atmosphere. Now you're not doing it in a noisy atmosphere. Now you're sharing your thoughts, your comments, your abrasiveness, if that's part of it, whatever. You're on a limb a little bit in a different way where, people can hear things now and comment on it and make you maybe make you obviously a little bit hesitant about doing it, or at least aware in a way that you never had to be aware before. That can influence, that can impact people, that in one way or the other. There's no doubt about it. So yeah, that is something that can have impact in those kind of areas. Look, the main work is done in gyms, and you're doing what you do in the gyms, and there's nobody in the gyms, and you're yelling, you're doing whatever and the fighters fighting in that atmosphere. I know that now you got to take it into the arena. It's different, but they've been practicing that since they began being a fighter. Now, here's an interesting thing for me as a trainer. I've seen, and I know Paulie and Chris, I'd like to really hear their thoughts on this. I've seen, and I think this would be a great piece on its own, gym fighters. How many guys have we seen that are great gym fighters?
Oh, yeah.
Great gym. I mean, they could beat. I knew a guy, Johnny Walker Banks. This guy, he used to spar with Marvin Hagler. Not too many people could do that. He used to beat the crap. I was in the old Gleasons in Manhattan. He would beat up everybody. He could punch, he could fight, he was tough, he was everything. My God, when he got into the ring, forget about it. I mean, Pee Wee Herman. I mean, he just wasn't the same guy. And his record indicated it. His losses, his performances showed it. People couldn't believe it. They said, that's not the guy I just saw spar with Marvin Hagler. Or that's not the guy I just saw spar with, Teddy Atlas's guy, because he sparred. I wouldn't put a guy in with him unless my guy was really right, because he was that dangerous in the gym. Yet something got lost. Something great got lost in the transition from the gym to the ring, to the arena. And again, I know that these champions they've seen that themselves. Guys that are just great gym fighters, and it doesn't equate into the arena. And you would think it does. I'm sure the layman out there would say, Teddy, that guy probably became a world champion if he was able. Nope, not even close. And the reason I think this is interesting is there's a lot of elements that have come to play that sabotage these guys, where they don't take those talents that they obviously have. They display with good fighters, real good fighters, even champion fighters in the gym. They don't take it to the arena. Why? The crowd is part of that. That when they don't think anyone's around, when they're private and they can't be hurt emotionally, and they don't have that emotional strain on top of them, beating down like the sun beating down, evaporating you. When they don't have that, when that is not part of the mix, they are themselves, and they're good fighters, even great fighters. But now you take them to the arena with they're out there. They're out there for the world to see, for other people to watch, and to have company with all that, not to be isolated from that. That evaporates them. That, in many cases, that does not allow them to take those talents and bring it the way they had it in the gym. So that's interesting to me, is that, with these gym fighters that couldn't get over the hump, couldn't get over that hurdle, part of it being the crowd, part of it obviously being other elements too, all in the mental area, the mental spectrum, all of them. But could that play when you're in there with an empty arena now? I really, Paulie, Chris, does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. I'm sure Paulie has known guys that were gym guys, but when under the lights they couldn't do it. They couldn't put it together. You'd see him in the gym, and it's funny. You always root for those guys because you see them in the gym, you see how talented they are, and then on Fight Night you're watching them like, I just can't put it together. I think of a fighter, Robert Allen. He fought Bernard Hopkins a couple of times, and I remember so many other fighters talking about how good he was in the gym and how he was a phenomenal boxer. And then just in the fights, he just really couldn't put it together. Bernard beat him twice. They won no contest. They fell out of the ring. Bernard hurt his shoulder. But yeah, I think there's countless guys like that. You go through gyms, you see these guys that look fantastic, and they're in there. But listen, man, it's what you can do under these lights. That's what really separates the champions from everybody else.
Yeah, I grew up training in Gleason's gym in the old days. At a certain point in my career, I went to train at Wildcard Gym, two very boxing saturated gyms, and I saw guys like this a lot, where amazing gym fighters. They would make some of the champions look so bad in the gym at times, and then on Fight Night they just could never put it together. It's such a weird psychology. I never really understood it. I don't know if it was maybe the smaller gloves or the lights or a little bit of both.
And Paulie, how about the opposite guys? The guys who got beat up in sparring all the time, but on Fight Night they're absolute killers. Kovalev?
I got a story about that. I remember being in Wild Card, and I was on the card with Hopkins and Chad Dawson. And no, it was Morales Barrera. It was Morales versus Maidana, actually. And Lyoto, this guy, I think, I don't want to, Yoshida was his name. He was from Japan. He was fighting James Kirkland. And he took the fight. I think it was a short notice fight. He showed up from Japan and then finished out training camp in LA for the last 3 weeks. And the card was in Vegas. And I was on this card too. So I'm watching, this guy would get his brains beat in every day. I mean, I was watching Peter Quillen beat this kid's brains in every day. Everybody, I mean, I was like, dude, Kirkland's going to hammer this guy. I mean, this is crazy. I was like, Kirkland at that time was knocking everybody out. Yo, Fight Night, this guy came out and knocked Kirkland out like 1 or 2 rounds. Yeah. I couldn't believe it. And that makes the point you're making, man. Sometimes you get guys in the gym that are just, they don't wow you at all. Then on Fight Night, they crack you.
Sergey Kovalev, when he was really dominant and at light heavyweight, and he was knocking everybody out with stab jabs and right hands down. And the stories of him in the gyms down here, he couldn't win a round. He couldn't win a round in sparring, but was knocking off everybody in the top 10 in the light heavyweight division for years.
Yeah, it takes
This could be a new outlook for those guys, a whole new career, that they fight in empty arenas. And these gym fighters that could never take it to the arena, they become world champions now. Nice. What a story. And it was all uncovered on ProBox.
That's right. That's right. On Top Stories, that's for sure. There certainly is a special mentality when the lights come on and you're fighting in front of thousands of people. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. Always appreciate your time here on Top Stories. Reminder to scan the QR code, like, subscribe, leave your comments on our YouTube channel. Download the ProBox TV app, where apps are available to watch the next edition of our Contender Series, December 7th, back in Ireland. Should be a great night of fights from Ireland. I'm George DeMatteis, and this is Boxing Scene's Top Stories.
ProBox TV Contender Series. On December 7th, look for an all-out Irish war as Dylan the Real Deal Moran battles Tyrone the Mighty Celt McKenna at the top of a stacked ProBox-worthy card.
For more ProBox TV, scan the QR code on the screen or go to the App Store and Google Play. ProBox TV, your boxing channel.